Welcome again. Hope you had a good lunch, a good break. Back to the 7th UMD EJ Symposium. In this session, and by the way, I'm Sacoby Wilson. This session, we'll be talking about this is a state report back session, and so just make sure I get in the right place in my agenda. Sorry, y'all. This is state report back session, and today we'll hear from agency folks from Virginia, Maryland, DC, from the region to talk about their work, doing air quality management within this region. So the title of the session is State of the Air, Reportbacks from DC, Maryland, Virginia, and Delaware officials. So we have today with us Angela Marconi. She's the Division Director, Division of Air Quality, Delaware Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. We have Kelly Crawford, Associate Director, Air Quality Division, DC Department of Energy and Environment, also known as DOE. Ted Aburn, Director, Air and Radiation Management, the Maryland Department of the Environment, MDE, and Jeff Steers, Director of Central Office Program Operations, Virginia DEQ. So again, this session is really going to be a report back to talk about their work doing air quality management within the region and how they're integrating environmental justice into this work, including looking at issues, concerns around cumulative impacts, concerns around equity and enforcement, permitting and compliance. And then what's the future for air quality management in the region? What are the initiatives and policies that they're engaged in as it relates to this new renewed focus on some of these issues as part of this Biden-Harris administration? So my first question for everyone, hold on a second. First question is, again, thank you for being here today. We're lucky to have you to join us. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and the current work you're involved in at your agency? And let's start with Angela, please.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm the Air Director for the state of Delaware's Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. We call ourselves DENREC. I'm fairly new to this role, only about 3 months in, so I am still learning a whole lot every day about all things air quality, and environmental justice has been a huge part of that as well. DENREC has a department-wide EJ initiative that we're working on to look not only at the environmental control aspects, but also access to natural resources, because that's in our purview as well. And we think that's very important also. So we're working on, changing the way we do outreach and not just waiting for feedback to come to us, but being more accessible to communities and really asking for what they have to say so that we're getting the feedback that we need to do our work better.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Kelly, could you go next, please?
Yes. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kelly Crawford, and I'm the Air Director for the District of Columbia, the Associate Director for the Air Quality Division at DOE. I'm really happy to be here. So to frame the work that we're doing with respect to environmental justice, we're actually doing work in 3 different arenas. Currently, I'm working with the district hired its first Chief Equity Officer. So I'm working directly with her on implementation of the REACH Act to meet some racial equity goals in the district government as a whole. Additionally, I am the chair of the equity committee for the agency for Department of Energy and Environment. And so I'm leading the effort to incorporate and operationalize equity within the agency. And then last but not least, I'm firmly committed to operationalizing environmental justice through our programs in the Air Quality Division. So really hitting on firing on all cylinders lately in the district. So a couple of things that we've been working on in all of those arenas, and I'll start with air quality. We've put a lot of focus on making sure that we center environmental justice and how we utilize our funding, especially our grants. So for example, our Volkswagen settlement funds, we identified areas of the city that are most vulnerable. And we used proxies for data that we didn't have. So we used health data as proxy, primarily asthma rates in the district and mortality rates from cancer and heart disease, to identify underrepresented neighborhoods and prioritize projects in these areas with additional funding. And additionally, just in 2022, which is just a couple of months away, we have a new grant that we will use to provide resources, including digital literacy training and tools to households with children who have uncontrolled asthma. So those are just kind of two examples of how we're prioritizing environmental justice communities in the grants that we manage. And we're also using those funds to electrify fleets in these areas first to cut down the air and noise pollution.
Cool, thank you. You still going, Kelly?
That was it.
Okay, sorry, I thought you were still going. My bad.
I was gonna mention the reg, but I can talk about it later.
Yeah, let's talk about it. We have additional time to talk about that. Thank you, Kelly.
Okay,
Tad,
so well.
No, we're gonna Kelly. We'll wait in a few minutes.
Gotcha.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Go ahead, Tad.
Thanks, Sacoby. My name is Tad Aburn. I'm the air director in Maryland. I'm probably the old timer on this panel. I've been doing this for over 30 years. My expertise is in policy development, regulation, and legislation development, but I also have a lot of technical expertise in monitoring and modeling. I also have a real role in our enforcement program. Some of our hottest issues going on right now linked to what's happened over the past few years are environmental justice and climate change. We are doing a huge amount of work on climate change, and I would urge anyone to take a look at our climate change webpage. We're approaching being able to develop a plan that'll get us to a 60% reduction by 2030, which is a real accomplishment. On the environmental justice arena, we also have an MDE-wide initiative to really beef up our environmental justice work, but we also have several key projects going on within my administration. One is, like Kelly mentioned, we are using available funds to do work with communities to improve the life of those folks in the communities. Probably the best example is that in about 15 communities around the Port of Baltimore, we've invested over $15 million so far and $30 million by 2025 on mostly diesel cleanup projects, combination of Volkswagen monies and DERA monies. We also have a whole bunch of community partnerships that we've started. Several in the Baltimore area, like Turner Station, one that I'm involved in with Dr. Wilson in Jeffery, Maryland. And for folks on the phone that might be interested, give me a call. We're very anxious to continue to begin these partnerships with communities. So far, as part of two of those partnerships, the community has helped us select some diesel reduction projects as well as a citizen science project.
Cool.
And finally, we've also initiated something that's very interesting in the Chevrolet area. It's what we call a targeted inspection program, where the Chevrolet area has put up a hyperlocal air monitoring network. We've been part of that. We've helped them check the data. And we're now using that data and citizen input to target inspections of both stationary sources as well as mobile sources and transportation hubs. We're also using citizen input / complaints as a driver of our targeted inspection program. So anyway, we've got a lot going on. I'll be happy to talk a little bit more about those maybe as some of the questions come up later. So,
yep.
And Dr. Wilson, thank you so much. This has been a great conference so far, symposium. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Go ahead, Jeff. And we'll also give you time after this for those of you who have slides to also show your slides. I just want to give you a quick opportunity, do a quick overview, and then you can dig a little bit more if you have a few slides. Go ahead, Jeff. Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. Good afternoon, and thank you for hosting this and for inviting us to be on this panel. I think it's really great to be able to collaborate between our states. We do a lot of that as Region 3 states working together. So this is just a natural progression of that. I'm kind of unique from perspective on this panel in as much as I dabble in just about all of our regulatory programs in the agency. And, you know, I'm originally from Ohio. I spent 20 years at the Ohio EPA, and then I've got almost 20 years here. I was a regional director in our Northern Virginia office for a while, which really was eye-opening to understand the I&M program and a lot of the air quality issues facing NOVA. You know, some of the things that we're working on is looking and collaborating with, you know, our environmental justice communities. We've got the administration has set up the Environmental Justice Council. We also have that we participate in, and it's a broad, you know, environmental justice issues across all of state government. But we also have the Environmental Collaborative Group, which is specific, a group of folks that work with us on how we're going to implement various aspects of EJ and integrate these into DEQ's programs. It's a great opportunity for us to understand better the issues. It wasn't that long ago that we, you know, in Virginia, we didn't talk much about environmental justice. And so I like to think of it as we're in our infancy. We've actually hired a director of we created an Office of Environmental Justice, and Renee Oyas is newly hired as our Environmental Justice Director. And so we're really working to integrate environmental justice into our program, into our strategic planning. We're also working collaboratively, or need to work collaboratively, continue with the Virginia Department of Health. We're not a public health agency per se, but we cross a lot of paths in our air, water, and waste programs, and specifically in air, they have a lot of community health programs that we're working to better understand, and how environmental justice can work with vulnerable communities when we're talking about public health, the nexus of public health and impacts to the environment. And then one other thing that I'm personally involved with is, you know, we talk a lot about this, you know, the NACs and the standard air criteria pollutants, but we also, you know, look at, you know, how are pollutants transferred across media, and especially with emerging contaminants like PFAS. And so we're trying to better understand that, and have got a lot of collaborative work with our, you know, our point source discharges under the NPDES program, our air emission sources, to try to understand and survey them and get a better handle on how those emerging contaminants may be impacting our regional air quality. Although that's an emerging science in and of itself, because of the need to have better EPA approved methods to be able to capture that, but we're working on that as well. So that's just kind of a side thing. But and then finally we have, you know, I think we recognize at DEQ that in order to have a great understanding for staff to have with the needs of environmental justice communities and distressed communities, that staff need to understand the basic principles of how we as an agency should be acting, and the behaviors we have with each other. So we've actually, as part of this governors in this administration, are developing a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan that goes into our strategic planning as well, on how to become a more diverse workforce and how to include those concepts into our day-to-day work, so to better understand the communities that we serve. And that's it. Thanks.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I think we probably need to forego the slides. What do y'all think about that? Because I think it's going to take a little bit too much time to get through.
Dr. Wilson, I'm fine with that, but what I would like to do is make sure that those slides are available to folks who are interested. And we're very anxious to meet with communities, especially virtually. We're happy to go through some of the slide deck I have is a lot more detail on the questions that were answered, but when we meet with communities, we also often add a few more issues that the community leadership says they want to talk about. So I would very much, it tells a story about Maryland, about how we went from having perhaps the country's worst air quality in around 2005 to how now our air quality has improved to the point where we're on the verge of meeting all the federal standards. And then it takes us into that piece that I know we're all interested in today, which is this issue of community exposures, hotspots. So I'm fine with foregoing the slides, but I would like to offer it to anybody on the phone as a follow-up if they wanted to invite us to a community meeting or any other kind of meeting that we'd like to be able to brief folks at.
Thank you. What we can do is I'll give this task to Rachel. We can make sure that Rachel, if you can send the slides to Rachel, and Rachel can put an email in the chat, that we can set up a Hoover site so folks can air quality feedback. They can review your slides, and then we'll make sure you have that at that site on the Hoover page that you'll have your contact information so that then people can ask you questions and try to meet up with you. Thank you for that invitation, Tad.
That sounds perfect.
Okay, so this next question kind of builds off of Tad's point, and Tad and Kelly know how I feel about the NACs. The NACs are great. The NACs are not really protecting the communities that we're talking about when it comes to environmental justice, right? And so the air is getting cleaner, but for some folks, the air has never been clean, right? And because they have numerous environmental hazards, as Tad was saying, others have said, mobile and stationary sources. So to speak to that, this is a term called cumulative impacts. And really it's talking about, again, the cumulative burden of these facilities. These would be EPA permit facilities on the Clean Air Act, both the major sources and minor sources. In 2020, the state of New Jersey passed a cumulative impacts bill. I believe also Massachusetts just passed a cumulative impacts bill. So the question to the panelists, are you familiar with these bills? Have you looked at them? How can they be useful in your work? What are you doing to address cumulative impacts in rulemaking, permitting, and enforcement? I know there's like 5-6 questions within that one question. Y'all know how I roll. But Jeff, can you take a stab at that? How are y'all integrating cumulative impacts into your work in Virginia?
Okay, I think again we are familiar with New Jersey's bill and looking at the burden of health hazards that are associated with the different types, like to your point, the NACs is protective of human health, but when you layer on other cumulative sources that may be contributing in a neighborhood, for example, we have to look at that. We haven't gone too far. Our State Air Pollution Control Board has brought this topic up too on some permitting issues. But the first place we have to start is making sure we understand where we have environmental justice communities. So to some of that point with that bill, we are working with the EJ Collaborative that I mentioned in developing a really good mapping tool to really create and we're looking for a metric that really will help us define communities on a very localized level, not just EJ screen, but really kind of tailoring this mapping tool to help applicants understand and help DEQ understand, and the public, what really is in the neighborhood around a permitted facility. We're also looking at, one of the first things that we can be doing before we even get to cumulative impact is making sure the public understands what's out there with outreach, with early intervention. DEQ had proposed something that was part of this New Jersey bill that was somewhat similar. We had proposed legislation last session in our General Assembly to require facilities to actually, before they submit a permit application, they go through a whole public participation process and do things like, notice the meeting or meetings, multi-language opportunities for public notice, those types of things. Mm-hmm. But it was never passed by our General Assembly this past session. So we're going to continue to work on that. But I think one of the things we're looking at is, I think Tad mentioned earlier, we're looking at, or I can't remember who did, but we're looking at too at how do we target compliance inspections, for example, and where we have the greatest need to ensure that air permit limits and emissions are meeting the requirements of their permits, and it's a difficult thing for us. We will have to go through to, when we look at cumulative impact, we're going to need to really help frame that and get some guidance from the communities as well as from EPA, other states, on how we in Virginia are going to do that, because like I said, we're very early into that process here. So
okay, cool. Kelly, what are y'all doing in DC? I know you mentioned some things before, but can you give a little bit more detail for the audience, please? You're on mute, Kelly. It's fine. You're still on mute.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, yes.
Sorry about that. So we're absolutely familiar with the New Jersey regulation. It is consideration of cumulative impacts. So in the district, our authorities are set up differently. We are at the beginning stages of developing a proposed regulation to address environmental and public health inequities in vulnerable communities through our air quality permit process and how we're enforcing the existing air quality regulations. So we just recently completed our first phase, which is outreach, where we had some targeted listening sessions, which Dr. Wilson was a part of, to help us determine the scope of the regulation and how to best engage the public. And so through these lessons, or through those like listening sessions, we've gathered a lot of information from both technical experts and community advocates to better understand how we can use this regulation and the existing authority that we already have in the district to advance environmental justice and to bring justice to communities as quickly as possible. We've had 5 sessions. We talked about how we would identify areas, what kind of outcomes we want to see from the regulations, how to best communicate information to the public, and how to best engage with the community. So we hope to have that draft out this fall. And additionally, to support that work, we're exploring technical solutions to our hyperlocal monitoring deficit. So we're exploring and planning to launch some pilot hyperlocal monitoring projects in communities where we have existing known issues, to try to, one, give the district the opportunity to explore some new technologies to do hyperlocal monitoring, but also so that we can get data to share with the communities and also inform decision makings in those communities. So we're really looking forward to that. And it's very exciting. And in tandem within the agency, we also we are planning for the rollout of our equity narrative and framework for the district of the Department of Energy and Environment as a whole. And within that, we have an effort to build cultural capacity within the agency staff to understand the issues, and also to ensure that all of our teams, and not just my team on the air quality division, but agency-wide, have a baseline understanding of racial inequity, the history of race in the district, and how it still influences and is influenced by the decisions we make in our positions in government, to empower us to start to use our power to correct longstanding issues wherever we can.
Thank you. You make a couple of really important points. In the CEEJH session, just to be real quick before Tad goes, that was something that Matt Tejada, director of OEJ, said. You got to, if you're going to integrate environmental justice throughout the whole agency, you got to change the culture within the agencies. And that's a big deal in how you engage, how you have to humanize people. A lot of people have been dehumanized, they've been invisibilized. So your role as agency members and staff and leaders, how can you humanize and respect and value people's culture and respect and value them as the impacts and their narratives and their experiences, and so integrate that into your decision making. That's really important.
And Sacoby, that goes both ways. And I think something that also came up in our listening sessions is that we also have to have an understanding for the cultural conditionings of the communities themselves, especially when we're thinking about listening to the community and understanding what we're hearing with that context of what folks have been conditioned to expect from government, and working to bolster trust, but also to really understand. For example, we always have this thing with complaints, and I know TAD has a targeted inspection program. We did some targeted inspections a couple of years ago on gas stations. And one of the things that we noticed is that we had high volumes of complaints about odors from gas stations in certain parts of the district. But when we did the targeted inspections in the low income neighborhoods, and we inspected every gas station east of the river, we found more egregious technical violations, but never heard a complaint from a single community member. And we know that it's not because people don't care. We just understand that the folks in the community have essentially been conditioned to think that their complaints don't matter. And so what looks like, salience is actually a deeper structural racism issue that we are responsible for addressing. So we can't just always go to the communities that have the access and the political will to get the agency's attention to do something. We have to seek out those who need our help the most.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm gonna come back around to that in a few questions. Go ahead, Tad, on the cumulative impacts issue. And you're muted, Tad.
We are very aware of what's going on with New Jersey. We spent considerable amount of time with the New Jersey folks, looking at what they're doing. We're looking at it from an agency-wide perspective, though. I think it's important to regulate when you go talk to communities. What you hear is it's truly cumulative. It's not just the air piece; it's the waste piece, it's the water piece. So it's going to be a real interesting process. In Maryland, we already have done a little bit of that work because our air toxics regulation, it actually does not set standards. It allows increments. In other words, a source is only allowed a certain increment of what might be a safe level. Is it perfect? No, it's far from perfect, but it's a good start, and it builds off that concept that there's a lot going on in these communities. And Dr. Wilson, you've heard me preach this before. My opinion is that there's also a lot we can do before we have the perfect answer to cumulative impacts. And so when you do go out and talk to communities, sometimes it's the simplest things that are the things that are bothering them. Things like fugitive dust, things like bus and truck idling. And so we can deal with those things. And so as part of our efforts, we're not only looking to the future, but we're looking right now in some of our communities that are perhaps overburdened with environmental problems. What are the things that we can target and do that'll help improve the quality of life in those communities with a real focus on overburdened communities? Another great example is I'm a big believer in cleaning up diesel emissions. Like I said, we've spent over 25 million around the Port of Baltimore working with communities. We can do that. And now that there appears to be a lot of opportunities to find federal funding to do more of that, we should be working with communities to do as much of that as we can, even before we have the perfect answer to cumulative impacts or from the data from hyperlocal monitoring. We can do things that help improve the life of communities, and we should get on with that.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Thank you, Angela.
Hi. So yeah, I mean, we're really aware of what's going on in New Jersey, our neighbors, and Delaware is such a small state. It's really important to us to see advances happening, not just in Delaware, but around us, because it's easy for, Delaware to get the spotlight, especially now with President Biden in office. And we talk a lot about how air pollution doesn't respect state boundaries, right? We talk a lot with respect to the NACs about upwind states, but it's the same truth when you're talking about incremental changes on a more local scale. Improving the air quality in New Jersey helps us, and stronger standards in Maryland help us. It all helps to make us all stronger. And Delaware doesn't have a regulation and development right now, and I'm hoping that's something that we can see move forward soon. But we're making changes with our permitting process, not to the cumulative impact, not to looking at different media yet, but expanding the modeling that we do for air, because right now we look at sources sort of in a vacuum, and we need to take a step further back and look at the bigger picture and incorporate, because often you don't have one facility that is all by itself. You have a facility and a facility and a facility, and all of that has to be looked at together. And that hasn't been a part of our program in the past, but that is what we're moving towards.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think, from the work that I do in the region, I would say that definitely permitting has happened in the vacuum, and that's part of the problem. That's why this cumulative impacts framing, it will be useful to communities. And also, I think for all of you in your work, when you think about these facilities that you're managing, right, there's also this whole issue of risk management plans. Angela, from the Crota facility that had the leak in Wilmington, right? Communities don't know what they don't know. And a lot of these facilities have, chemicals on site and have emissions. Some communities may be dealing with gas flaring and other impacts. So there's a whole emergency preparedness component to this too, when you think about, managing these facilities that we have to be aware of and making sure that, you have so many hazards, so many facilities have been permitted, and then you have the risk of explosions, leaks, spills. That's a lot. So I think Tad said it. We got to do more. We can do more, right? And speaking of doing more and going to Tad's point about the money, because Tad and I talk about the money a lot, I'm gonna go to the next question, okay? Because I mean, you got this new administration. You got, as Angela, you got President Biden. I would say that this administration has been gotten serious about environmental justice, probably the most serious administration on environmental justice ever. Even with President Clinton's executive order on environmental justice, even with what President Obama did. So, you have Congress people now who feel empowered to do more too in this area. So you have Senator Markey of Massachusetts introduced the Environmental Justice Air Quality Monitoring Act in July, which authorizes $100 million annually towards the establishment of a 5-year pilot program for hyperlocal air quality monitoring in communities with EJ issues. It'll enable state, local, and tribal air agencies to partner with nonprofits, air quality data providers, and other CBOs to identify hotspots, the multiple pollutants, and deploy a hyperlocal air quality monitoring system in affected areas. I mean, I believe this is building off of California's AB 617. So what implications does this legislation have on our work in this region, your work in this region on hyperlocal air quality monitoring? How can similar legislation, or even without legislation, y'all, what can you do to kind of say, hey, we want to do a similar program? Like Tad said, you don't have to wait for that bill to get passed. So how can this type of approach increase community engagement and inform policy and action? And I'm gonna start with Tad.
Great, thank you, Dr. Wilson. Again, this is a great question and one that really excites me. It's not just how will this affect us, but what a great opportunity we're starting to get to do a lot more of this hyperlocal monitoring. You have two things going on at the same time. You have money that's going to allow us to do some of this work, and you have the technology evolving to a point where it's really actually pretty good. If you would have asked me this question 2 years ago, I would have said, oh, I'm not sure those low-cost monitors are working that well, but actually our experience is getting better and better. We're involved in 3 of these hyperlocal air monitoring networks. The one I mentioned earlier in Jeffery, it's a very good program. Kudos to Dr. Wilson and his CEEJH team. They're the ones that put it together. The mayor is extremely involved. We've become involved. Thank you for inviting us. I hope you view us as a positive new partner. But we also have one in Baltimore, which is really interesting because it's partially research, but also it's a really intense network and is trying to actually improve sensors for pollutants that are harder to measure than just fine particles and some other easier to measure pollutants. And so the Baltimore effort, pretty much driven by Johns Hopkins and Yale, we're a partner in that as well, is another exciting project. And we have a similar project in St. Mary's County, Maryland. And we're learning a lot by being partners in that. We're working with each area to try to make sure that the sensors that are being used match up with our federal reference measure monitors so that we can do some comparisons of the data. And it's been a very, very positive experience. I also think it's a wonderful tool to build partnerships with communities for. It's a sort of a citizen science approach. It allows us to talk about air quality and what it means and what it doesn't mean. And it allows for us, the state, to provide a useful function to the citizens, which is if they do decide to put a monitor up in their backyard, we can help make sure that it's actually working and doing the right thing. So it's going to clearly affect things quite a bit, but I look at it as a huge opportunity in an area that perhaps is long overdue for looking at. This whole issue of having the tools to look at hotspots in communities and then try to figure out the policies you need to deal with those hotspots. Through the Chevrolet process, we're already looking at more effort on idle reduction. We're looking at a continued targeted inspections and compliance actions. And so you can learn so much from these hyperlocal air monitoring efforts. And I see it as a real opportunity over the next 10 years. And having the feds step up, there's not only the laws that are in place, but the feds are stepping up with multiple grant opportunities that are going to be out there to support hyperlocal air monitoring networks. And again, a great area where we need the community's help, because I think a lot of those grant opportunities are going to be focused on going to communities, not going to the state agencies. So working in partnership with the community that wants to do a hyperlocal air monitoring effort, it's going to even become more important over the next few years. I see this as a real opportunity.
No, thank you for that, Tad. Angela.
I think Tad, has spoken. I agree with what Tad's saying. I mean, we've done community projects in the past, but they really have been led by our agency. And in some communities, we've left out the trust building part of that. And I think that having community involvement in the monitoring itself is going to be a great tool to use to make progress in the trust building between the agency and the communities that we have lacked in the past. Because, we show up, we do a project, we have the results, and then nobody hears from us because, as Kelly mentioned earlier, a lot of times we don't hear from them and there's been this disconnect. So I think this is a great opportunity to fix some of that and establish better connections with the communities. I'm really enthusiastic that a lot of these programs are coming with funding, because that historically has been a huge barrier for us. The barrier that I still see in place for our agency is staffing. And we have just had so much trouble retaining staff. And, it's partially to do with the pandemic and a lot of changing demographics. But the Clean Air Act is complicated stuff. And I have lots of really enthusiastic young staff who I'm excited to have, but there's a huge learning curve on our end that we need to, get over to be able to execute these projects. So there's going to be some learning, I think, from our side as well as the community as we move forward.
So thank you for that honesty and transparency there, Angela. And also you speak to the issue of needing to have more staff in general at our agencies, whether it be our DEQs, DEPs, DNRs, or our health agencies in these efforts, right? Let's go to Jeff. You're mute, Jeff.
Sorry, I always do that on these kinds of things. So I would concur with Tad and Angela. We've had some success recently with hyperlocal monitoring. There was a partnership and some money available to the Science Museum of Virginia here in Richmond, and they had a very successful program that helped the city look for green space development opportunities based on temperature and particulate information that was found in these sensors. And so it was a good synergy to work together with the community to not only characterize air quality on a local level, but where there's some opportunities to better develop green space in an area that is lacking. So that was something that was great. I also would concur with Angela that we do studies. We have 3 big studies that we did that where one was an air toxic study in Hopewell, where this was 10 years ago. We did a huge study, and I think the community still tries to want to understand what does it all mean? What did we find? What are you doing about it? And we got to be able to answer those questions. And it does take staff. We've been fortunate that our General Assembly just recently funded some additional staff, especially in our air monitoring program, as well as some equipment that we can supplement with our EPA money. So we've got the expensive monitoring, but the neighborhood hyperlocal monitoring effort with citizen engagement, that the technology has advanced itself to the point where I think we're all comfortable with the fact that it's got realistic, good data that can be used to make decisions and help us in doing things like targeting inspections and looking for other sources that we may not be aware of. So, so I think, and we're going to continue to try to leverage the federal money with with what Virginia has to offer, because it is it's definitely an opportunity, especially with the American Recovery Plan and some of the other things that are going to allow for some more money to come into the states.
Cool. Thanks, sir. Kelly.
Hey, yeah, so everyone's had like some really great comments. I'm gonna try not to repeat, some of the things that Tad's already kind of touched on. I'm always excited to see more money for air quality. Historically, air quality has been underfunded. Our funding has remained level, but our costs continue to go up. And so what I see is that, our monitoring costs are super fixed and they continue to grow. And so what happens is monitoring takes up more and more and more of our overall budget. So it means that we do other things less and less and less. And like Angela was saying, we have challenges keeping qualified technical staff on board long enough to get them up and running and really making a difference. So definitely looking forward to more funding. We have a couple of hyperlocal monitoring efforts that are kind of in progress, but to Tad's point, we're also focused on what are the things that we can do right now so that we can start affecting change. So one of the things that we're kind of experimenting with, we do have like a stationary monitor. We have a couple of our stationary monitors that are actually situated close enough to communities that we can, that we've been trying to explore ways to compare the data from those stations to the other stations in the district to give or to identify sources for overburdened communities and to communicate that directly to the community. So for example, we have one community that we happen to have a monitoring station, and it's an environmental justice community. And we've been able to see, check on, like, for example, we'll see particulate matter spikes, and through a lot of effort, determine, well, okay, this spike we're seeing this in another point, but is it attributed to traffic, or is it coming from activity at the wharf, or is it activity at Capital Power? So we're kind of experimenting with what are the other data sources that we can use and kind of cumulatively look at to see if we can get a better picture of what's going on in the community, while we're at the same time trying to stand up some hyperlocal monitoring efforts to support communities.
Okay.
And then, oh, go ahead. No, that's
No, go ahead.
And I was going to say, and then, but also we need the hyperlocal monitoring effort because you can't fix what you won't face. And we need to have metrics we need to have baselines so that we can track progress and so that we can, realize change and we can realize progress on air quality issues. So we still need to have the monitoring, but especially when our air quality budgets are so constrained, sometimes it's a decision of, a pound of monitoring or a pint of mitigation. Where do you put the dollars that you have left?
Yeah, I think that's an important point. And I would say, that speaks to the conundrum that communities find themselves in, because you have limited resources on your end as you're sharing with the audience, but then they're still being impacted, and that's impacted them from a health standpoint, an economic standpoint, right? So there's these disamenities, this internalization of these impacts that they experience that leads to a lot of these major social costs and health costs, right? And so how can we do a better job of, and this is getting, I'm gonna skip a question, I'm leading to the equity question. How can we do a better job of bringing in equity to understand in this world of limited resources, and in this world now, as Tad said, of new resources, how can we really, bring in equity, right? Because I mean, we're talking about, we have, these federal mandates, and going to this as Tad said, you all said, how can you go beyond the federal mandates? Because and move from, as someone said yesterday, as part of our NEJA discussion, to move from problem to solution. We want to collect more data, right? Better data. But then how can you move to a solution? How can you move to safeguards to protect folks from toxic air? What improvements can be made, with an equity lens and the work that you're doing? So I'm gonna start with Kelly in that question. I think you talked about equity before. And just, can you dig more into that, how equity can really push us forward and really move beyond the NACs and move beyond some of these other minimum things that may be minimally protecting folks, but when it comes to folks who are very vulnerable, the people we're talking about, we need more. They need more. Go ahead, Kelly. Oh, you're mute again. still muted, Kelly.
I'm on my laptop and I only have one screen, and it hides the buttons.
Okay, go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah, so Dr. Wilson, you're right. So equity when we rolled out, we're about to roll out, but when we roll out our equity framework and narrative for DOEE, we felt it was really important to communicate, especially to our scientists and engineers that work so hard at our agency, that environmental justice is a subset of equity. It's just one leg of all of the work that we need to do to achieve racial equity in the district. And so in terms of how we incorporate that into our work, we're doing things like we're looking at our budgets and we're challenging our staff to not only incorporate equity, but to articulate how they're going to incorporate equity into the way that they're doing their budget, and not just going back to say, what did we do? And then applying equity washing to that. So we're working on trainings, resources, tools, and supports to help staff to actually operationalize equity as part of their everyday work. And so the supports that we find that we're developing include definitions, making sure that we're all speaking the same language, having a clear equity narrative for the agency that's draft right now, but will be rolled out in the fall. But within that narrative, it has explanations from the environmental agency standpoint on how we incorporate equity into our work, why it's important to center racial equity, why it's important to start with racial equity as opposed to starting with other types of equity and equity and justice, and what the expected outcomes will be from that work. And then one thing that I did want to say from just talking about the funding is that it's really going to be important for EPA regionally and federally to work with the states and make sure that they keep the states in the loop on how the monies are going to be spent, especially when we have so many communities that are needing assistance, that we want to recognize the lessons learned from California, which is we don't want to be in the situation where we're pitting communities against one another to compete for limited pools of funds. So it's something that I don't think is appropriate for environmental justice, that just like monitoring is a base requirement for our agency, addressing the needs of vulnerable communities should be a base requirement for our agencies, and we should be funded to do what we can to protect those communities as a base requirement and not as something extra that we do that we have to write a budget for. Because when we do that, what happens is we start making decisions about the money that are in the best interest of getting the funds as opposed to the best interest of getting the community what they need. And I'll say, for example, we're really quick to cut staff on those grants because we need to maximize the benefit for the community. But then what happens, it puts more burden on our staff and we're already stretched thin. So we really need to figure out a way to get the funding that we need to actually advance equity. And that comes in many, many different shapes and forms, even right down to having funding to have internships so that we can increase the diversity of air quality professionals in this work. We know that internships are often a barrier for folks that are looking for full-time jobs that cannot afford to take unpaid internships. But we need to be able to have those opportunities, especially in air quality, given Angela's comments about how difficult and how chaotic air can be, to give folks opportunities from different backgrounds to get into the work. And so, and I'll say an example of how we're trying to live that and operationalize that. We're in the process of hiring additional staff for our inspection and maintenance program. And so we split the positions where, yes, we're looking for traditional air quality engineers to help on that in that division, but we're also looking for community, essentially looking for folks who know about cars in the community that we can teach and train and educate on the air quality side, but also can teach us more about car maintenance and barriers to keeping cars operating efficiently, and then also can help us as we start to develop some of our tampering efforts that our engineers are great on the air quality side, not so great on the auto mechanic side. So we're trying to bring additional diversity into the group because it also brings more voices to the table.
Cool. Thank you for that. And I think one of the points they made that I think is important, and I'm gonna say this question differently. How can you change the way you do business today? To what Kelly say, protect the most vulnerable. It's not a question for you to answer, Kelly, this way, get ready, but just in general, as a statement. I know you've already talked, we gotta pass the mic, man. But how can you change the way you do business to protect the most vulnerable first, right? Focusing on prioritizing those vulnerable first as in your air quality management. I think that's an important challenge to think about. Go ahead, Angela.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, Kelly just spoke really eloquently about all of this. But to go back to something that she mentioned before, you know, she was saying a lot of areas that have worse problems don't complain, right? Because people feel like they've already internalized the feedback that your voice isn't important. And I think that has played into how we do our work, because a lot of times we wait for comments. Is there a problem? I'll wait for you to tell me. And that doesn't work when the people with the worst problems feel like they don't have a voice. So that's a huge thing that we have to change about the way we perceive the complaints and how we do outreach with communities. Because when we're waiting to hear from them and they don't speak to us, or they don't have the trust in us, it doesn't work. The whole system doesn't work. And I would say that, you know, we have good intentions and we have tried to always think of the communities when we're doing our work. But when you make decisions in a vacuum without actually hearing from the people that are affected by it, you're not going to do the best job. You might get some things right, but you're definitely not going to get it all right. And the ending message isn't going to resonate with people that they're important. So that's really where I see we need to make changes. We need to make those connections and build the trust, and then continue the conversation and continue the relationship, because we have communities who are super empowered to reach out at the tiniest inkling of a problem. And that's great, but that's not really where the biggest problems are. And if we can't identify the problems, we're not going to be able to fix them.
Yeah, and I think y'all have already kind of said it. How can you develop tools that allow y'all to screen for the places with the biggest problems and put your resources, dollars, your focus on those most vulnerable groups first? And so that's a different way of doing business, right? Let's go to Tad next.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. And I think both Angela and Kelly covered a lot of this, so I'm going to take a little bit of a different angle, and I hope you at the end say, well, at least he's consistent. This is a critical issue again, and I think the first thing you need is you need leadership at the top to basically say, as an agency, we are going to do this. And that is what we have in Maryland. My secretary, Ben Grumbles, has made this one of his highest priorities, and this effort to increase focus in permitting, enforcement, and policy on underserved and environmental justice communities is amongst our highest priority at MDE right now. And so you need that message from the top. The second thing that, at least I think in Maryland, we're trying to do, at least in our AIR program, is we try to break this into two pieces. The first piece is what can we do now? What can we start to do now that actually makes the lives of folks that live in these underserved communities, overburdened communities better? And then there's the piece, the big picture policy piece. I think that's going to evolve over time, and we will start to see laws and regulations and other things that build equity into what we do. But in the meantime, there are so many things we can get going. Build these partnerships with communities. I think that's a critical first step. Listen to the communities, hear what they think their issues are. And Dr. Wilson, I actually think there's a key role for groups like your CEEJH group in helping in this partnership work, because we need facilitators, we need conveners. To be honest with you, when I usually start off with a community partnership, there's a whole big chunk of that community that views me as the enemy. I'm a government guy, I'm a regulator, I'm the guy that gives permits out. And so getting that trust started and built is really critical. And that initial listening is so critical. And what you may hear is that some of the issues the community has, the equity issues, are things that you can actually do something about right now. Fugitive dust is one of my classic examples. There's a lot we can do with fugitive dust. Idle reduction. If you go to these communities, what you're going to see is a lot of diesel trucks, a lot of warehouses, a lot of idling. And there's something we can do about that. There are the harder pieces like cumulative impact, which is going to evolve over time, but at least let's get started with this and get on with doing some of the work we need to do to begin to address these equity issues in these communities. So again, Dr. Wilson, you're going to get tired of hearing me say this because I say it so often, but there are things we can do now that can start to make the lives of the folks that live in these communities better, and we should start to do that.
No, thank you for that, Ted. And that gets back to the point again. How can we move? This is the thing. How can we move beyond the NACs? Right? This conversation is like, we got good air quality. Not in my community, right? We're good with ozone. I don't know. We're good with diesel and particulate matter. Not with my kids' asthma. That's what people are saying, right? So thank you for that, Ted. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Kelly. Go ahead, Jeff. Can you take that? It's pass the mic to you. What are your thoughts?
Again, I think everyone's made some good points, and I'll put another different kind of spin on it. One of the challenges Virginia has, you've got community, and we're trying to reach out and do outreach into the community. We're actually hiring folks in our regional offices that do nothing but reach out to vulnerable communities on educating, our process for community engagement on permits, to get ideas of what we should be doing as an agency. But part of our issue has been historically that you've got communities, but then you have local government, and no disrespect to the district. I'm not speaking that way, but we have a lot of communities that are feeling the pressures of development, and it's becoming more and more evident that they want to grow their communities. They want to welcome industry. And so it's easy for them to want to, establish new sources of air pollution, if that's bringing in tax revenue to the county and to jobs or to the local government that may exist. And we sometimes get our hands tied with some decisions because the community clearly is against something that the local government has already zoned as appropriate for that use. And we're kind of left with, okay, like as you referred to, we've got the NACs to guide us in permit decisions, but in a local area that might be very a micro area near a facility or a proposed source may have its own special needs that go beyond the NACs, and it's challenging for us to try to regulate that at this point, at least. And we've worked with the Virginia Department of Health a lot to help us in analyzing some of what we'll call the hot spots of the communities around some of our sources. But getting some of the local governments in Virginia to really embrace environmental justice and working with us early in a process when some company wants to expand, some source wants to expand or come into town, it may exacerbate a situation that's on a very local level, but we're kind of having to butt heads with the local government to say, hey, you're saying this is an appropriate thing. We're the environmental regulators that are going to have to permit this source. And it gets to the cumulative impacts discussion that we had, that how much more saturated with environmental impacts from air, water, and waste can this particular neighborhood sustain? And so I think the answer to some of this is we need outside help, I think, at times, to bring together local governments with the community, with their communities, to talk about, and the state can help facilitate with maybe some outside partners having these discussions, because it's been a real challenge for us.
No, thank you for that. And I think you hit on a few points that Tad mentioned. I know Kelly's had her listening sessions that she talked about before, provides an opportunity for that level of engagement. And also, I think for you as an agency, and for all of you, how do you go beyond the next? Understanding that, as I said before, there's these externalities, these social, environmental, economic, health externalities that are produced by air quality. So if the local government sees a tax revenue, on one hand, they're getting money. They actually, the same money they just got, they're putting it back out in paying for health costs, emergency room services, right? So part of that engagement and education that has to happen, and what does healthy economic development look like? So to kind of get to that a little bit, this last question I want to take, because we want to hopefully get maybe a question or two from the audience. So this last question to each of you, I'm kind of modifying question number 6 on the list, and give you a minute to respond to this. Is, you have climate change, right, as a big issue. It's going to make your job harder. How can we think about development in a way that's greener development? How can we think about transitioning away from fossil fuels and towards renewables and electrification and zero emissions transportation? What will that be? How can that help your agency? And how do you envision those type of things helping our work together when it comes to advancing environmental justice and addressing environmental injustice? So I kind of changed the question number 6, but give me a light in response. I'm gonna start with Jeff first. What do you think about these positive opportunities to bring in electrification, renewables, and zero emission transmission and this clean energy economy, and making your job, to maximize impact for communities that we're talking about today? Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very appropriate question, and we're doing a lot right now. For example, we've tried to accommodate some of the regulatory barriers to timely permitting of solar and renewable energy projects. There's quite a bit being done with offshore wind now. There's a whole economy that's developed in our Tidewater region where to actually support offshore wind, and that's something that we talk about, when the Biden administration talks about renewables and creating an economy, there's an example where we've got a whole new economy formulating in the Tidewater area of Virginia to support renewable energy. The challenge, one of the challenges we face in trying to do this is to make sure that when we're looking at one media, so we've got renewables, we're building a lot of solar panels. What are we doing with deforestation? What are we doing with stormwater management during the construction? We've had a lot of pressures in that area as well. So we have to balance that. And our biggest challenge is making sure the public, especially those that live in areas that are near some of this, really understand the bigger picture and appreciate the fact that this is the greater good that we're working on. And it's not just about the localized, what you're looking at or what's in your backyard. We're trying to support that as best we can.
And let's go to Angela next. And one of the things I've said in other sessions is, getting into like electrification. Electrification to me is a public health intervention, right? And so looking at these things like as interventions, right? And again, like your work as air quality management, what benefits do you see in your work, and how do you see, again, benefits to the communities that we're trying to serve and protect? Go ahead, Angela.
I think electrification of the fleets, especially like the diesel fleets, is so exciting. And I would love to see progress really speed up on that, because it not only provides a benefit for climate change, right? So large scale benefit. It provides such small scale benefit for the people that live on these routes. A lot of the complaints that we hear from people are truck traffic, diesel emissions, the dust that comes from the trucks. And if you can clean that up, you have, a large scale benefit when you're talking about climate change, but you also have community level benefits where the idling is quiet and it's not producing diesel emissions, and it's going to create real change quickly for people's life experience. So I think I would love to see that really take off and move a lot more quickly than it has been.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Let's go to Tad next. You're on mute, Tad.
So much. Great question. We could each probably talk on this one 10 minutes, so I'll be quick. I think we're on the verge of a paradigm shift. I've seen a lot of change in the way the private sector is looking at both electrification and renewable energy. And when that happens and you start to get the private sector investment, things speed up. Think about cell phones. How fast did that happen? When there was consumer demand for it and the technology happened, my God, the world changed because of cell phones and the way we communicate. I think the same, we're on the verge of hopefully seeing the same thing with electrification and renewables. And government programs can help. Things like RGGI, the work that a lot of us are doing on the medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle work we're doing. Those programs can help incentivize this market that creates these technologies and fulfills the consumer demand. One of my big worries is right now, one of the big challenges for electrification is infrastructure. People are used to being able to drive up to a gas station at the corner and fill up. And so we government folks need to really work. And there's a huge effort going on with infrastructure, the charging stations and other zero emission vehicle infrastructure. But again, a huge opportunity. It's going to have a huge impact on equity in underserved communities. Angela mentioned every effort almost I've ever done, except for maybe some of the rural ones. Diesel and truck traffic is always an issue. And so the sooner we can get to that, the better. A real opportunity again, I think. Climate change is really the driver behind this. And because of that, I think you're going to see huge progress. And again, a lot of additional funding coming to do these kinds of things and to speed the process up. So again, great opportunity. Appreciate the question.
Thank you, Tad. Go ahead, Kelly.
So everyone's had some really great comments. And I think I'll just kind of come from when I'm looking at the transition, this paradigm shift. What concerns me is that if we don't get this right, we will exacerbate inequity. For example, infrastructure, we have to look at ways that there are economic barriers to green development in underserved communities. So, citing a project in one area that it might be a better benefit to the community, it might be difficult to get the infrastructure necessary to do that development, or it drives up costs, making the development itself seem unfeasible. So, for example, we're only gonna see an equitable and just transition to electrification if we, and that's the greater we, are intentional about using an equity lens on how we do that work. I'll give an example of how we're trying to make sure that we use equity to drive our decision making. For one of our DEER grants, we are electrifying some street sweeper trucks for the Department of Public Works. But with that comes a commitment that those trucks will be piloted in communities that are in Ward 7 and 8, which are areas where we have sometimes 20 times the national rates of asthma. What we don't want to see is that communities that are more empowered and better able to uptake new technology don't hit the ground running. They'll drive up demand, great, yes, but they'll leave the same communities that are the most vulnerable behind. So we don't want to see all of the new electric cars going to communities where they already have pretty good cars. We want to see electrification uptake in communities where they're still, driving cars till the wheels fall out. So we don't see the turnover in the fleet that we need to improve the air quality in those communities. So it's a double-edged sword. We have to make sure that they have the infrastructure there so that they can have electric vehicles in their communities. We need to make sure that the bus routes that are electrified first are the ones that serve communities that are already overburdened by air pollution, even though it might not be the most popular route. So we have to make sure that we lead first with equity, especially when there's a lot of money involved, to make sure not only that the dollars go to the community, but that the community is not, spending half of the money just trying to get up to par. So for example, if they don't have monitoring and they get a lot of money, they have to spend some of it on monitoring. So that takes away from the actual benefit of the funding that they're getting. So we just want to make sure that we're limiting the economic barriers to electrification.
Thank you for that. We had a session yesterday that we talked about warehouses, goods movement electrification. And one of my colleagues on that session, her name was Dr. Shelly Francis. She's with EV NOR. And so they focus on equity and electrification, equity and electric car access for communities of color. So there are folks out there that talk about that issue, but I think you're exactly right on that point. So we have time for one question from the audience, and we'll make this a lightning response. So basically, this question is, it sounds like, panelists maybe do a little bit of blame shifting. We don't have enough staff, community members don't bring things to our attention. And the point of this question is, y'all have power, right? So, and understanding there's power differentials between the agencies and the communities they're most impacting. So the question is basically saying, challenging y'all to say, how can you step up more to help our communities who don't have access, communities who are marginalized? And this question is saying, you know, it's being disingenuous to not recognize the power that you have and the power differential that's in place. So what do you say to that, to in response to that question about stepping up more in dealing with this power differential, and again, going beyond the NACs again? So I'll go to Tad first.
Great, and we're in lightning round, right? So yes,
yeah, lightning. You got 30 seconds, sir.
That's a great question and right on target. And I think part of what we're trying to do in Maryland is to acknowledge that these partnerships are true partnerships where there are different things we can do. We can take certain actions that the community can't. We just need to do them. So it's a great question. I think it's something that is on our front burner. And you know, hopefully, if whoever asked the question, if you're involved in a partnership with me and I don't move in that direction, please scold me for it.
Okay, thank you, Tad. Tad, we'll make sure we send people to scold you a lot. Then Tad, let them scold them. Okay, that's a moment from this session. Thank you, Tad. Go ahead, Jeff.
So
yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah. Okay. So we, you know, I think we're trying to do, you know, when you say that we've got the power, we need to use it. And I think, at least in Virginia, we're still trying to understand the level of what that is. And the only, you know, the best thing we can do is work closely with the EJ Council that was established and our EJ Collaborative to listen. Like I said, we're getting out into the community more with some staff that we're having dedicated to this. But at the end of the day, some of what the expectations are of the public, we just don't have the statutory authority to do without the General Assembly helping us. And so it's going to continue to take work. And I know the EJ Council has the ear of our GA, but it really is going to take work on getting the right types of authority. When we talk about cumulative impact, for example, there are some things that I know that neighborhoods and communities would like to see that we need to get some authority. If we're not getting it from the federal government, we certainly can still get it from state government. And so when I say when we say we've got power, it's not just my agency, it's all of us that have impacts that work together with communities and including our General Assembly.
And thank you for that, Jeff. I think, you know, this list of communities I work in, they would say, you know, those things are important, you know, but you have the authority now. If you had the authority to permit polluters, you have the authority to stop polluters, right? So that would be like the response, you know, back from the communities. And so, but thank you for that push. And so what Jeff is saying, for those of you in Virginia, we got to get these laws passed, right? I'm sorry, my long A, Mississippi came out. We got to get the laws passed, okay? And so to give these agencies more power, and also to push these agencies to do more, right? So let me go to Kelly this time, and go ahead, give me 30 seconds, Kelly, in response to that question.
Sure, just really quickly, some of the things that we're doing. So yes, all of those things are challenges that our agencies face, but they're also challenges and opportunities for us to change the way that we work. And that's exactly what I've been trying to do. I gave the example of how we're trying to change some of our positions, thinking about what we really need. That's also an effort to increase diversity within my staff, not only like racial and ethnic diversity, but also diversity in like background and experience, to bring more voices to the table and give more people power. I'm also particularly interested in making, you know, the district has a difficult problem because of where we're situated. We have a lot of staff that don't live in the district, are not really familiar with the district. So also prioritizing candidates that are coming from the communities that we're trying to protect. I'm also really committed to making sure that when I work with our community partners, something that I always say is that whatever it is that I'm going to do, I want you to personally see your influence on this decision that was made. And so I try to be really intentional about that and make sure that we do the work of building the capacity within the community so that they're able to come to the table and share power with us. So we have a Clearing the Air workshop where we work directly with the community to help understand our authorities. So when we go beyond saying like, oh, we can't do that, but going through with the community, why we can't do it and what we can do to change the law, the regulation, or whatever it is that's preventing us from doing the thing that theoretically we'd like to do. So all of those things together are just small measures that cumulatively go to addressing equity, addressing environmental justice in the work that we do in the staff, in our workforce, and all ultimately resulting, hopefully, in better air quality for the communities that need it the most.
Thank you, Kelly. And let's close out with Angela. Go ahead, Angela.
Thank you. I mean, I think the first step to making a change is acknowledging, the problems that exist. And I think that we're trying to do a better job of seeing where the barriers are so that we can remove them, and why were they put there so we can move beyond them. Jeff also spoke earlier about partnerships with other agencies like local government in terms of zoning and working with public health. And I think that strengthening those partnerships is important too. And just being willing to get the feedback that may not always be great, because if all we're getting are compliments, we're never going to fix anything. So we have to be willing to hear the hard feedback and take it back and make changes.
No, thank you for that. Thank you, panelists. Appreciate the time today. I think this was really helpful and giving a lot of information to the audience. And I think what y'all also are saying is, what we're hearing, how can you work better together? That's part of the reason why we had this panel. Because what happens in one state and it happens in DC impacts what happens in Virginia, Delaware, Maryland, et cetera. So I think there's opportunities for y'all to work together. And also, I think there are community folks who are on this, Zoom who want to work with you. So we'll make sure, as going back to Tad's request earlier, we'll make sure that happens and that we set up a Hoover site, and so we can be follow-up with you for communities who are dealing with, EJ-related air quality concerns. So just want to close this session out again. Thank the panelists, everyone. We appreciate you. And our next session begins in 4 minutes because I, ran over, my bad. It begins in 4 minutes. So thank you, panelists. Y'all take care.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.